Moore is standing by live in Oakland. She's going to update us on how things stand there. Linda.
Well, that's true, Paula, and nobody's thinking about baseball out here tonight. First of all, I wish we could give you some exact numbers, how many people dead, how many people alive. We are still being told officially only 7 fatalities. That just is not possible. There will be many more. As many as 200 or 300, we really don't know. There are some signs of hope. Once again, there is a chance there could be some survivors. So much conflicting information. This is exactly what happens when all communication and transportation arteries are shut down. It just virtually cuts off the vital organs of a technical society like we have. We are unable to get access to the disaster area. We are unable to really talk to each other on the phones, although that's starting to come back now. But one of the most dramatic events was this helicopter drop. We talked to one of the construction workers earlier.
For right now, we haven't heard any voices, and we don't know that there's any survivors. But like I said before, we're keeping an optimistic attitude. We're hoping that there are survivors. There's air pockets in there. There's some spots, you know, that may house some people.
How would you describe the cars inside?
There's, you know, it's tough to say. They're flat. They're I've seen cars crushed to 6 inches.
What else have you seen?
Some limbs laying alongside the street. You know, outside the cars, you see a couple arms laying out there. It's not looking good. I mean, you know, we're hoping that are some spots that there's some survivors, but you know, from what we've seen as it sits right now, we've seen absolute destruction.
How long is it going to take to clean it up?
Years.
Right now you can see all the media. They're crowding around. They're hoping for the mayor of Oakland to arrive. A press conference is getting ready. At this point, we are, of course, hoping to get some exact figures, but it really isn't likely we're going to know exactly how many people are alive or dead. We know that there are many, many cars, as you just heard, still trapped in that upper and lower deck, and we are watching this disaster. We are watching it develop. We are starting to watch the equipment and the rescue crews arrive. We hope there will be some action and some more information through the rest of this evening. That is it for now. We will be checking in later. Back to you in Hollywood.
Sorry, guys.
Thank you,
Linda, very
Linda
much.
Moore.
If Mexico City taught us anything, it's that you cannot give up hope. You really can't.
That
and
is
they
for
pulled
sure.
a lot of people out of there days after that earthquake.
And in Armenia, we thought there were some coming out,
You know,
too.
they don't think there's anybody there alive, but we will see. If you have ever been to the little town of Santa Cruz, you know how beautiful and quaint it can look and is. Well, it, about 75 miles south of San Francisco, was the epicenter of the earthquake. Just 10 miles from Santa Cruz exactly. Damage there is widespread. Our Mark Brown followed the rescue and cleanup crews at their work.
The Pacific Garden Mall in the heart of downtown Santa Cruz is a ghost town. When the quake struck here, it struck hard. Store roofs caved in, glass shattered, window displays were tossed like toys. Mid-morning brought teams of specially trained search dogs, trained to sniff out human bodies in the rubble.
Some of the structures have failed and collapsed. The time of day it was, and with a lot of employees and other people down here shopping and doing other things, there's always a possibility that somebody else is in there.
So far, 2 people are known dead in collapsed buildings. 3 others died elsewhere in Santa Cruz. Families have taken shelter from creaking homes at a Red Cross shelter, while those who have the heart are cleaning up and making do, trying to get through the day after. In Santa Cruz, Mark Brown, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
We now have Mark Brown live on our phone lines, I believe, I hope. And earlier tonight, Mark, in the broadcast, we said that sister station KGO in San Francisco is telling us that downtown Santa Cruz is basically gone. Is that really true?
I wouldn't say it's gone. I would say that there are a lot of buildings that are heavily damaged, but there are a lot of buildings that have some moderate damage and can be repaired. There is a good portion of downtown, I'd say half of it, and especially around that mall, that's going to have to be torn down. Those buildings simply cannot stand. But to say that downtown is gone, I think would be to overstate it.
In the hilly area around Santa Cruz, have you been out to look at some of the surrounding countryside and see what you can find out there?
Well, we've had some troubles getting through on some of the roads. They are blocked with landslides, fallen trees, and the like. We do know that some 30 houses have suffered some significant structural damage. 3 of them have been destroyed, knocked from their foundations, flattened. At least 1 has burned to the ground.
What about water, Mark? Is there water for the people in Santa Cruz?
There is water. Water has been restored. It was restored early today, apparently. And the latest word, the word we had earlier when the mayor had a press conference was that the water might not be safe to drink because there were some problems with the sewer lines here. People were advised to boil their water or to treat it with bleach, with a few drops of bleach to purify it, to prevent any kind of diseases that might come from drinking impure water.
What's the mood there tonight? Have people begun to relax a little bit, or are they still worried about aftershocks and just kind of jittery?
Well, people are a little jittery. I've noticed a lot of young people running around on the streets, and it's frankly getting to the point where the police have had to crack down a little bit. They were taunting the police for not letting them go into some of the quake-ravaged areas to sightsee. The officers have responded by cordoning off even larger sections of the city. You should see parts of downtown. There's just yellow tape going from almost the length of the block. There is not tension, I'd say, but just people without much to do or trying to let off steam, I suppose.
Well, feelings are running very high and nerves are on edge, and I think that's understandable after something like that up in Santa Cruz. Mark Brown, thank you very much for getting to a phone and getting to us. We'll be back to you later on. All right.
And we've got a little bit more to talk about here in the area of Santa Cruz. It could be many days before people in the Santa Cruz and Bay Area can get back into their homes and see exactly what they lost. Earthquake victims are now getting help at dozens of shelters around the Bay Area. The homeless are lining up for cots to sleep on and for food and water. Baseball great Joe DiMaggio searched a shelter list for the name of a missing relative. Power has been out in downtown San Francisco since the quake hit at 5 after 5 yesterday. Utility crews work to restore lights to more than 1 million customers who lost their power, but some remote areas could stay in the dark for another few days. One store opened its doors in spite of lack of power to help feed the people who live in that neighborhood. And in Santa Cruz, downed power lines caused a fire. Other fires in the earthquake area have been fueled by broken gas lines. As you know, in those areas, the gas is going to remain shut off until the leaks are eliminated. But most of the fires now, we understand, are under control or are out. Paul.
That is good news. The Vice President, Ann, was in Southern California where this happened yesterday. He flew today from San Diego to the ravaged area for a closer look. Vice President Quayle, along with his wife and Transportation Secretary Sam Skinner, walked through the streets of the Marina District. Quayle said that although the total damage and loss is still not known, it is very clear that, as he put it, an unfortunate disaster has struck California. He said he would give the president a damage report as soon as possible. Of course, some of the residents of the hard-hit area couldn't make it back to their homes last night. Some of them got a look this morning at what was left, and reporter Tori Roberts has more on that aspect of our story.
At sunrise, firefighters were still battling fires in the Marina District of San Francisco, one of the neighborhoods hit hardest in the earthquake. At least 3 people were believed dead in the aftermath of the gas-filled inferno that destroyed an apartment building, consumed an entire block, and forced the evacuation of 400 people.
Because of the intensity of the fire, we could not approach it that close. So PG&E was required to shut it off at the street, which they did, I think, approximately 7 o'clock. And within 45 minutes to an hour, the fire was declared at least contained, and within another half an hour after that, it was under control.
A dozen buildings in the Marina District collapsed. Homes valued at $500,000 crumbled.
The quake reduced this 4-story apartment building to 2 stories, and 5 people are believed to be still inside, and no one knows if they're still alive. Search dogs will be guided through the rubble as soon as the fire department gives us okay, but that could take another 2 hours.
Many of the apartment buildings and homes appeared undamaged from the street, but many residents say their foundations are cracked and their homes are uninhabitable.
Then when I started seeing the walls split apart, I knew it was the big one. And everything just came crashing down. I tried to get out the door, and as I did, I saw this stair flip up, and then I just saw the sidewalks open up. And then I looked, and there was just a cloud of dust, and this place had already gone over in a matter of 15 seconds. That whole apartment building was gone. And then I watched a man from the 3rd story climb out that window right there. He rode it all the way down.
The quake shut down San Francisco's business community. The financial district was empty today. Employees were told to stay home. Businesses suffered minor damage from breaking glass. San Francisco's landmark Transamerica building reportedly swayed back and forth during the quake. Only several windows were broken. Other downtown businesses sustained extensive damage.
No You know who comes through when there are disasters like this is the Red Cross. And after yesterday's tragic quake, the Red Cross in San Jose was reporting last night that they were critically short of type O blood. Now the need is said to be growing for blood throughout the Bay Area, and they need virtually every blood type as of tonight. Here in Los Angeles, hundreds of Southern Californians have begun responding to that call. And as usual, the Red Cross is helping to coordinate the blood-giving effort.
How can you not be moved to come down here and help as much as you can? I mean, monetary only goes so far. You can't buy blood. So I came down, on my lunch hour, and I'm trying to help out as much as I can.
This is a Red Cross, or it was a Red Cross facility in Koreatown. A lot of Southern Californians have been arriving all day to donate blood. One place said they usually get 20 donators in a day. Today they had 175. But they need more, and they need your help. If you would like to donate blood, or if you would prefer to send money, they need a lot of money as well. And your local chapter of the American Red Cross is the place to call for information on that. Paul.
A lot of people today talking about, well, what about down here, and what does it mean for us in Southern California? When we continue with the program tonight, dangerous faults in Southern California, that's next. And another look at that incredible home video shot by somebody on the Bay Bridge when the quake hit.
One of the biggest problems facing the Bay Area on this day after the quake is transportation. Two major bridges are shut down, the San Mateo and the Bay Bridge. As you know, a complete section of the Bay Bridge caved in when the quake hit, and that sealed off the major link between Oakland and San Francisco. Engineers now saying the damage is worse there on the Bay Bridge than they first believed. Minutes after the quake, a home video camera captured the horror of a motorist ignoring pleas to turn around and driving right down into the crevice there. The driver was killed. Officials now wonder why a bridge that had been reinforced against a major quake snapped apart so easily.
Quite obviously, the reinforcement hasn't done the job. I mean, we're going to have to find out what went wrong and give a full explanation to the public.
There is no word yet, no positive word on how long it could take to get the Bay Bridge reopened. They're saying it's going to be at least 2 weeks. The Golden Gate Bridge was not damaged and is open at this point. Paul.
And talking about transportation, most roads near Santa Cruz, South San Francisco, just miles from the earthquake's epicenter, are sealed off to all but emergency traffic tonight. About 20 miles south of Santa Cruz, a stretch of Highway 1, a very pretty road there, is in one piece. The road is not on the official list of those closed because of earthquake damage, but as you can see in these pictures, it is closed. Highway 1 is cracked and partially collapsed. Supporting columns under the raised roadway buckled, and they crumbled. No word yet on how long it's going to take them to open that part of Highway 1. When you think of San Francisco and you think of transportation, you think of those lovely cable cars. No, they were not running today. Neither were the buses, neither was BART. We are going to turn to Dana James tonight to talk about what is working in San Francisco in terms of airports and transportation and what is not, and the problems people are likely to encounter up there. Dana?
Well, Paul, Bay Area residents happy to be alive, albeit weary from last night's devastation, and no doubt shocked today by the realization of it all, are just trying their best to get around. Public transportation has been disrupted. There is no bus service between Oakland and San Francisco, and travelers using the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, also known as BART, were stranded overnight, but the system was restored around 5 this morning, with the exception of 2 stations. Bus service inside the city of San Francisco is operating, but on a limited basis. The popular Amtrak service that runs north to the Bay Area and further onto Oregon has been shut down. No trains were damaged, but some of the areas of track have buckled in the San Jose area. The FAA says San Francisco International Airport is operating at more than 50% capacity. There was no damage to any runway, but the air traffic control tower was affected and 3 workers were slightly hurt. Ground delays continue due to the limited number of flights. Airport officials are pacing the arrivals and takeoffs to 27 flights per hour. Normally, it's 33 to 45 an hour. United Airlines was most affected and suffered damage at its gate area. United's only running 7 planes instead of the normal 22. All of the smaller airports in the area are open and running at 100% capacity, including both Oakland and San Jose International Airports. San Jose Airport is staying open 24 hours instead of shutting down at its normal time of 10 p.m. to accommodate any increase in traffic. In terms of talking with a loved one in the Bay Area, the phone companies are begging, please stay off the phones for at least 24 hours. High volume of calling is their biggest problem. PacBell is restricting the number of calls into the Bay Area while increasing the number out. And they also ask that all non-essential business calls be eliminated. That includes fax machines and computer lines because they all tie up the phone network.
And it's still a very big problem up there, and I know it's hard not to call when you have friends and relatives. It's real difficult to keep your hands off the phone.
They ask that you just wait, and hopefully they will call you.
Yeah, that's the thing you can hope for. Thank you, ma'am. The thing that we've been wondering down here, besides how people are, friends and relatives up in the Bay Area, is what does this have to say about the big one that we keep talking about here in the Southland? And seismologists and other scientists are telling us that this devastating quake in the Bay Area should serve notice to us that we should keep preparing for the big one in our area, because this was not our earthquake. This was somebody else's. John North.
And last year, scientists predicted the probability of a magnitude 7 on the northern San Andreas Fault at 30% within 30 years. The probability of a 7 on the southern San Andreas Fault here in the Los Angeles area is much larger at 40%. And seismologists say the San Francisco earthquake can be seen as a warning. It's far smaller than the expected great one here. The Whittier earthquake registered 5.9, causing widespread damage and the deaths of 8 people. But to scientists, it was nothing compared to San Francisco's 6.9, which released 30 times more energy. Or the Great Quake on the San Andreas, which could register an 8 and 300 times the energy of the Whittier quake. This graph shows the dramatic differences on the Richter scale. From the 5.9, which hit Whittier in 1987, to the magnitude 8, which will hit the San Andreas Fault in Southern California. U.S. Geological Survey seismologist Lucy Jones, however, says the quake on the northern San Andreas Fault will have no impact on the southern portion near Los Angeles.
The fact that there was an earthquake yesterday in San Francisco doesn't increase or decrease the chance of an earthquake in Southern California today.
The most densely populated areas of the Los Angeles basin could face even more of a threat from 2 recently discovered faults. One of them, the Elysian Park Fault, runs right under downtown Los Angeles. Unlike the San Andreas Fault, which is a strike-slip fault and 45 miles away, the Elysian Park Fault is a thrust fault buried deep beneath the surface of downtown L.A. It and another new thrust fault running through the South Bay and up the coast were discovered and mapped by USC seismologist Egil Haukson. They both have the potential of creating an earthquake equal to or greater than the one which just hit San Francisco.
Faults that I discovered beneath us in the Los Angeles basin will cause a lot of damage in a very localized area.
So as bad as San Francisco is, it's only a sampler of what faces people in Southern California.
This is only a very gentle warning.
We've got to remember our San Andreas earthquake is going to be even bigger than the one they just had. This is 6.5 to 7. We're talking about 7.5 to 8.
Just last month, the U.S. Interior Department turned down a request by earthquake scientists and university researchers to start a Southern California Earthquake Center, a center to coordinate earthquake studies and predictions. Paul?
All right, John, thank you. We are going to turn to Johnny Mountain now, and he's going to talk about the hot weather we're having.
Boy, you know, it was one of the topics of conversation today, all of this hot weather that we've had, and we're looking for a little bit of relief, and we probably need it at this point. Not only was it hot here, but there's a hot story on the other side of the ocean. Yeah, we're talking about Cape Canaveral.
The quake up in Northern California has completely overshadowed another of today's major news stories. There is other news. This is good. The launching of the shuttle Atlantis. And Gene Gleason has the story tonight live from the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral. Good evening, Gene.
Hi, Paul. Well, Atlantis finally reached space today. And just a couple of minutes ago, the booster rocket was fired on the back of the Galileo spacecraft, and that sent it off to its first destination, which is the planet Venus. It will loop around Venus, come back to Earth twice through the asteroid belt, and then off to its final destination, the planet Jupiter. But to do all that, it had to shake off bad weather, protesters, and the San Francisco earthquake. Quake damaged the Air Force's critical space tracking center at Sunnyvale. That's where Galileo's IUS booster rocket is controlled. Any damage to the critical computers and communications equipment at Sunnyvale would almost certainly have caused another delay here. But the Air Force determined by early this morning that it could still support the mission, and the countdown picked up again. that still left the weather at the Kennedy Space Center, which a few hours before launch was just plain nasty. Dark clouds and heavy rain showers covered the area as the astronauts suited up and headed for the pad. But just then the rain stopped and the skies cleared, in time for the launch team to push the button.
4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition and liftoff of Atlantis and the Galileo spacecraft bound for Jupiter.
The successful launch finally ends the jinx that has kept the Galileo spacecraft sitting on the ground, years after it was originally scheduled to go to Jupiter. JPL scientists who have suffered through those frustrating delays finally have a reason to smile.
Today makes all that wait, all the preparation well worth it. You know, it's something to see that thing lift off. It really is.
NASA says there was no sign of those anti-nuclear protesters who vowed to disrupt the launch. Galileo, powered by the nuclear generators they were so concerned about, now begins a 6-year journey to Jupiter, where it will study the solar system's largest planet for 2 years and send a probe hurling into the Jovian atmosphere. It will send back information about its crushing pressure and the swirling Earth-sized hurricanes at Jupiter. So after many, many years of those frustrating delays, Galileo is now on its way, and so far everything seems to be going very well indeed. This is Gene Gleason reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and now back to Los Angeles.
Thank you, Gene. It was a real up feeling, a little lift today
Nice
to see
to
that
see
thing
something like
take
that,
off
yeah.
so beautifully. And the weather was certainly hot.
Oh, it was hot today. Yeah, it was nice to see that. You kind of got to, you know, after what happened last night and everything. Yeah. And right now, we've got a warm condition. It's going to be warm for the next day or so, but there's relief in sight. Thank goodness. We'll show you what's going on as we take a look right now outside. And here we go. Yes, to the beach. Where else? Give you right now what is going on. The almanac for today, the high was 95. The normal, 78, the low 62, time of sunrise and sunset. Our current condition is clear skies. We have 90. Relative humidity is at 31, wind southwest at 10, and the pressure is at 2997. Okay, from today, this is what is going on. A front coming in. We'll tell you more about that in just a second. Lots of rain, as you can see, in the eastern part of the country. We'll tell you about that right now. My old fort, when I was in the service, they sent me to Fort Stewart, Georgia. And it picked up a couple of inches of rainfall today down there, as did Florida. Moving up the coast up into Virginia, there's been some flooding there. The higher elevations of the mountains, we're getting some flooding there, up to 2 inches of rainfall. And it has been very cold. With that high, with that ridge building in, we're getting quite a bit of cold air all the way down into Texas. Bismarck, North Dakota, 5 degrees this morning. And in Kansas City, it was 25 on the cold side. This morning, reflecting some of the temperatures, we were freezing. The freezing line was all the way down in through mid-Texas. And as you know from the wintertime patterns, this is really kind of early in the season to get freezing temperatures down there. We've got sunshine, Mr. Sunshine here, but with this front coming in, we see some showers up here to the north. It could be bridging down, and we think by tomorrow, the Bay Area, and if they don't have bad problems enough, there might be a 40% chance of rain by tomorrow. Okay, let's go to our forecast right now. And we'll put it together for you with our low temperatures, about 62. It's going to be quite extensive, the fog, that is, along our coastal area, along the beach area, as it was last night. And then tomorrow should be about 92. Another hot day. The valleys, as you can see, into the mid-90s tomorrow. Dense fog, coastal area should burn away. And we have an air quality, which we didn't have time to get to, but we'll show you that a little bit later on. The air quality is going to be pretty bad tomorrow. First stage smog alerts in San Gabriel, Pomona Valley. But there's some relief in sight. And so we were expecting the 5-day to reflect that. And there you see it Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, back down into the 70s. So if you can enjoy the heat, enjoy it, because it will be getting cooler.
Disappearing.
Yeah. The reason we had to rush along here because we had satellite commitments in sports, and here with sports is Jim Hill. Jim.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much. Of course, will the World Series be resumed? That's the question on the minds of baseball fans the day after that earthquake up in the Bay Area. Baseball Commissioner Fay Vincent is meeting right now with officials from the city of San Francisco to make a decision on the future of those games. Rick Lozano joins us live now from Candlestick Park. And Rick, are you as surprised as I am that they're even considering to play the games up at Candlestick Park after the quake?
Certainly am, Jim, and that's one of the problems that's going to have to be dealt with here in the next few hours and perhaps on into tomorrow and even Friday. Some of the people in the Bay Area are considering whether there should even be baseball played, considering the tragedy of the past 24 hours. One comment from Commissioner Fay Vincent that came through crystal clear was that baseball is going to take a very low-profile approach to the remainder of the series. He says baseball will take a back seat considering what has happened here in the Bay Area during the past 24 hours or so. The resumption of the series still very much in doubt. Where the series would resume, if it does, is still a question, and perhaps that will be answered in the press conference that is underway. Now, there have been reports that perhaps ABC, the television network, is exerting some sort of pressure on Major League Baseball to adhere to some sort of timetable. But Commissioner Vincent today said that is not the case at all.
The people at ABC in the meeting were entirely supportive. There's no pressure whatsoever. The only decision we've made is not to play tonight, David. And as I say, I've learned long ago that there's just no point in speculating. I don't want to deal with hypothetical questions. We just don't have enough data. I hope that we'll be able to finish the commitment to play here in San Francisco, but it's just too early to know what the circumstances are.
Again, the press conference underway at the downtown St. Francis Hotel. Perhaps some of the answers to the questions that linger will be forthcoming at that time. Baseball, again, taking a very low priority approach to the rest of the World Series. Commissioner Vincent says he does not want to subtract from the police and security forces that would be needed to stage a game here at Candlestick when they are so urgently needed throughout the rest of the Bay Area. If the series continues, he says he would like for it to be in a very graceful and dignified manner. Now, we came upon some information just a short time ago. There were some building inspectors inside of Candlestick Park who came out. They did not want to be interviewed on camera, nor did they want to be quoted, but they did tell us that Candlestick Park has been declared a limited entry stadium at this time, and that it would take 3 to 5 days to complete an entire evaluation of the stadium, so there would be no baseball able to be played here at Candlestick during that time. The Oakland A's, meantime, moved in. They packed up all their gear. They moved out. The future of the series, at least here at Candlestick, is still very much in doubt. That's it for now. Rick Lozano live in San Francisco. Back to you, Jim, in Los Angeles.
Okay, Rick, thank you so very much for giving us that report. You know, Paul, I was at the forum last night and talking to some of the fire department people and people like that out there, and they told me, and they're familiar with Candlestick Park, they told me that they should have at least a minimum of a week to 10 days to inspect a structure of that magnitude, because they don't want to take any chances at all. And in listening to Rick, when he talks about 3 to 5 days and then maybe having a decision, I don't think that's a very wise choice to do that. I don't even think they should even consider having the games up in the Bay Area.
The longest delay between World Series games was in 1911. They waited 7 days between games 3 and 4. You know who was playing? The Athletics and the Giants. Ironic, isn't it?
That's right.
Okay. We'll be back with more of our coverage and more news on this 5 o'clock edition in just a moment. The Bay Area quake has been an air traveler's nightmare. Getting to and from the Bay Area has been frustrating for business flyers and vacationers alike. At Los Angeles International Airport, many flights have been delayed for several hours. Others have been canceled altogether. Worried people up north are anxious to get back home.
Family is okay, but we have friends that live in the Marina District in San Francisco, and we're concerned about them. Saw their block on the news last night, and it looked pretty well devastated.
Now, San Francisco International Airport has been operating, but at reduced capacity since the quake hit. It's business as usual at other Bay Area airports, though. If you're headed up north from the Southland here, you should expect, obviously, some delays in the process. Ann?
Very considerable delays, more than likely. We have more to tell you tonight about the earthquake in the Bay Area, a lot more to come. Dr. George has a special report also on what we can do here in Southern California to get ready for the major earthquake that is still being predicted for us. Psychologist Irene Casorla joins us to talk about how to deal with earthquake fear, and we'll have the latest from the Bay Area, still shaking after yesterday's quake. Recapping our top story tonight, the San Francisco Bay Area is still digging out from the nation's second deadliest earthquake in history. The numbers from this quake are high, at least 272 people killed, and a damage estimate that has skyrocketed already past $1 billion. It has been 24 hours now since this catastrophic quake that measured 7 points on the Richter scale up by the Bay. Bay Area officials report nearly 3,000 people have been treated at local hospitals, and damage is widespread, extending over an area of 100 miles. The worst of it including the Nimitz Freeway in Oakland, where a half-mile stretch of the double-deck highway caved in and crushed hundreds of cars. National Guardsmen are patrolling in many areas tonight to prevent looting. Authorities say 50 people have already been arrested on looting charges since the quake happened. At the White House, the president signed a disaster relief declaration for 7 Bay Area counties and authorized $273 million in federal aid to be sent to the Bay Area to help. Paul.
We talked about this last night, and what kind of a psychological and emotional effect does something like this have on people? Dr. Irene Casorla, a psychologist, is with us tonight in studio to talk about that. I talked to my daughter on the telephone this afternoon, and I would describe her as a very squared-away young lady. She's got it together. Very upset about what she's heard and what she's seen, especially the Nimitz Freeway and the people trapped
She's worried
under there.
about others.
Is that a common reaction?
It's interesting. There's nothing common. Everybody has their own way of experiencing anxiety and fear. Some people can't sleep and they're very worried and they can't relax, they can't concentrate. And other people, you know, feel good, they're delighted, they're alive. So from being very positive and grateful to being depressed and powerless and feeling, my gosh, there's no control, the earth is crumbling. And this is the important thing. This is why people are so frightened. When you're about 2 years old, you learn socialization. And you have to control your bowels, and you have to control your eating, and you have to control your anger. You don't get to bite the little boy next door. And it's control and control and control, and you're used to it. But when the world goes out of control, when the ground goes out of control, and the earth starts convulsing, this is real fear.
Yeah. We can't predict everything in our lives, and it's terrifying when they
It's truly terrifying. And your daughter...
Who lives here, by the way, not up there.
It doesn't matter
Right.
if you're... Well, when they had the quake in northern China and 250,000 people were lost, people here, far away, you know, it was another world, they were terrified. But parents need to listen to their children, you know, hear what is really bothering them, let them talk it out, and give them a lot of contact, you know, a lot of hugging and closeness, a lot of family stuff, invite the relatives over, but talking, and then get busy with organizing your life and preparing for a disaster that may come.
That's the
Preparation and action is antidepressant.
That's the key. Stockpile those water supplies and find out where the gas
Good.
pipe is. Right.
That's
Mix a
how to
little
keep
TLC
busy.
with it.
That's right.
Okay.
Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you, Irene.
Thank you, Irene. We've got more to tell you, a lot more coming up here. Stay with us, please.
The earthquake had an effect on the stock market. There was a modest gain on Wall Street today. The Dow was up nearly 5 points, with gainers leading decliners by about 4 to 3. 167 million shares changed hands. There was considerable early selling sparked by fears of damage to companies in the quake area, but the prices then turned higher once investors learned the facilities were operating okay.
There is so much to talk about today, and of course it doesn't stop here at 5 o'clock. It continues at 6. Tawny's got a preview.
All right, Ann, thank you very much. Of course, we're going to continue our coverage of the Northern California earthquake as San Francisco begins to assess the damage and what it's going to take to get going once again. Residents in areas closer to the epicenter of the quake are gathering resources for vital services. Experts tell Southern California residents to take a lesson and learn something from this earthquake and get prepared. We'll also have the latest on plans for the interrupted World Series when Harold and I step in right here at 6 o'clock. Now, though, back to Paul and Ann, 5 o'clock edition of Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Tawny. Again, talking about Southern California. Will the earthquake yesterday shake up plans to double-deck some freeways here in Southern California? That story's coming up next.
The devastation of the San Francisco earthquake has a lot of other cities asking what could happen here. Mark Coogan reports LA city officials gathered today to see what they can do for the Bay Area and also asking what can we learn from the damage up there.
To begin, the city has sent help to the Bay Area.
The city of Los Angeles has sent some of its professional technicians to that region.
Mayor Bradley announced this afternoon that city fire department officials and building inspectors have joined their Bay Area counterparts in assessing what the stricken region needs to recover.
As additional resources are needed, Los Angeles will respond.
Then there is the impact of the quake on this area. This stretch of the Harbor Freeway near the Coliseum is being widened to handle an elevated transitway opening in 1994. But the thought of a double-deck freeway in Los Angeles, following yesterday's freeway collapse in Oakland, drew opposition from local officials today, like County Supervisor Kenneth Hahn and City Councilwoman Joy Pikus. Caltrans, though, said the Oakland freeway was a 1950s design.
I have a great deal of faith in our engineering design and what we've learned through earthquakes, and you know, it's just like buildings.
the newer buildings are much safer than the old buildings.
Old buildings are another problem. As many as 100,000 people live in unreinforced masonry buildings which still have not complied with LA's earthquake upgrade law. Money is part of the problem, but today LA City Council members also blamed bureaucrats and slumlords.
We've been in a catch-22 situation. We know that we can't afford to displace these people, but can we afford to continue to risk their lives?
It isn't just the money. We also need the hammer or the sledgehammer on the other side, that either we take away the buildings, we do something. We have to force them to do it because they're sitting there on a time bomb, as we all are in the city.
In the background of LA's effort to help the Bay Area and to address its own vulnerability to an earthquake was the knowledge of the inevitability of a similar disaster right here. Mark Coogan, Channel 7 Eyewitness News at LA City Hall.
We have a bulletin in just into us now from San Francisco. An explosion has just rocked a Caltrans paint yard beneath the Bay Bridge. That's on the San Francisco side. Authorities say it is not known. They don't know at this point what caused the explosion, and they are still trying to determine the extent of the damage. Caltrans officials report there are no injuries from the explosion, and we do not know if the blast is related in any way to the earthquake up there yesterday. That's just in. Ann?
No injuries. That's
Nobody
the
hurt.
important line there, right. Scientists say it is just a matter of time before Southern California is hit by a major earthquake, so what should we be doing to get ready? Dr. George up next with that. Well, we have another bulletin to tell you about that has just come in from San Francisco, and this one may be a surprise to a lot of people. The World Series, it's been announced, will resume next Tuesday night in Candlestick Park. And that's going on as the Bay Area recovers from the earthquake of yesterday. Baseball Commissioner Fay Vincent said next Tuesday is the day. Neither Candlestick nor the Oakland Coliseum are ready for anybody to play ball in yet, but Vincent said he expects both ballparks to be ready by next week. Games 3, 4, and if necessary 5 will be played in San Francisco as scheduled before Tuesday night's earthquake. That gives them 5 days to inspect Candlestick Park and make sure that the damage that the park suffered is not too much to still endanger people's lives.
If the people watching us right now are anywhere near as surprised as a lot of the people in here were when we found that out seconds ago, there's a lot of surprise to go around.
Yep.
That's really something. It goes without saying that the earthquake in Northern California is just another reminder of the big one that scientists say is going to happen here in the Southland someday, sooner or later. Dr. George is here now with some timely advice on making your home earthquake safe. We can use it.
Yes, indeed, Paul. As you know, earthquakes are a fact of life here in Southern California, but we can live with this serious danger. The key, be prepared. Show what can happen in your house if your heavy furniture is not secured. But that won't happen here. Larry Ehrman has attached his furniture to the walls with brackets and eye bolts. It takes only a few dollars, but it could avoid injuries and serious damage.
See, it was tape gripped at the bottom so it wouldn't pop off of the brackets that are on the top. The turntable is held down with a quake grip leash so that it can be adjusted and leveled. And the receiver is being held down with just quake grip Velcro, so it will not fall out.
Your kitchen and bathroom cabinets are especially dangerous because they contain so many glass objects. Put in some earthquake-proof latches to keep them from flying open. Here are some more pictures from Morgan Hill. The people who lived here learned that lesson the hard way. There's nothing more important than having the right supplies. Here's a great idea, a personal survival kit under every bed. The main family supplies include wrenches to turn off utilities if necessary, a heavy bar to force open jammed doors, a first aid kit, sanitation and toiletry items, and plenty of food and water.
We want you to store the kinds of food that you like to eat and usually eat, but nothing that's too perishable. Things with a high liquid content are really good, like canned fruits and vegetables. Water is really more important than food, even though we tend to think about eating first. But if you use bottled water regularly, it's easy to just rotate an extra quantity of that through your normal supply.
And be sure your water heater is anchored to the wall. If it shakes loose in the earthquake, You could lose the valuable water stored inside and break your gas line. A flexible gas line. Now there's an idea. Medical help will be hard to find when a big earthquake hits, so be sure to have your first aid kit and know how to use it. And keep an extra supply of prescription medicines. Nerves may be a little jangled after an earthquake, so have an action checklist handy. You can get one free at your nearest chapter of the Red Cross. And also, your local Red Cross chapter can answer all of your questions about home earthquake safety. Don't hesitate to give them a call. And
they also need money. Could send a check at the same time.
golly.
Thank you, George. That wraps it up here for us at 5 o'clock. The news continues now with Harold and Tawny.
Ann and Paul, thank you. The death toll from yesterday's earthquake in the Bay Area now expected to rise above the more than 270 now estimated dead as workers begin to dig victims from beneath a collapsed freeway. And searchers are looking for people who may be trapped in collapsed buildings.
Reports are now coming in from Santa Cruz, just 10 miles from the epicenter of yesterday's quake, where dozens of buildings were destroyed or damaged. They're searching for more victims. And a major announcement just in, the World Series will be resumed in Oakland next week.
Next on Eyewitness News. Number 1 in Southern California. Channel 7, KABC TV, Los Angeles. Now, the Southland's leading news, Eyewitness News, at 6.
Good evening at 6 o'clock on this Wednesday night. This is the day after the earth moved in Northern California, and the San Francisco Bay Area continues to dig out from the disaster. The death toll has now risen to 273 in the deadliest earthquake to hit this nation since the Great San Francisco Quake of 1906. The damage is staggering, with an area of destruction that covers nearly 100 miles. The damage estimate has skyrocketed past $1 billion, and it will take the Bay Area years to recover. Electricity has been restored to about 2/3 of the affected area at this hour, but aftershocks continue to jolt San Francisco and Northern California. And just like last night, many residents are expected to sleep outside on their lawns for fear another quake will cause their weakened homes to collapse.
And Harold, as you undoubtedly know by now, and all of you do too, the greatest loss of life by far came on Interstate 880 in Oakland, the Nimitz Highway, where the upper deck of that freeway pancaked onto the lower level, crushing hundreds of people in their cars. Linda Moore is on the scene in Oakland right now. She has a live update for us.
Tawny, Harold, you know, every time I've come on today, we've had a different number of people alive and dead. Well, right now there is a little bit of good news, or maybe some hope. We just heard from the mayor of Oakland, and he announced that indeed they have just found a survivor. They pulled the survivor out. They will not say whether it's a man or woman, what condition the person is in. We will be getting that information. But once again, they reiterated that there are between 80 and 90 missing persons reports. So that means that there could very easily be over 100 people dead in this collapse here in the freeway, which is what we suspected all along. Now, earlier today, I talked with one of the construction workers. He was able to get up there. Now, he's one of the very few people who has, and he told us that it's just an incredible scene. Of course, some of the cars are smashed down to like 6 inches, he says, under the weight of that concrete. But he also said at this point that they do have a game plan, and this is what he told us.
We're taking the pipe bents, 18-inch pipe, 3/8 diameter steel wall, and we're going to build a bent to stand up underneath there. And what a bent is it's going to stand up there and hold the structure that we've got there now still. So then we can't jack anything off the top. We can't pick anything off the top in case there are survivors. We don't want to hurt anybody else that might be in there. And so what we need to do now is jack the bents up tight to the bottom of the deck. Then we'll be able to either cut a hole in the top deck with a hoe ram that the helicopter dropped up on there, or we'll be able to jack the top of the deck up with some 400-ton jacks.
When can you get to the body? So all the equipment has now arrived. Of course, there will be more. It will be, well, as he said, probably months before this bridge ever gets back to any kind of workable condition. I don't want to confuse this with the Bay Bridge. Although this Nimitz Freeway does attach to the Bay Bridge, it is a separate situation altogether. We're about, I'd say, about 5 miles south of the Bay Bridge right now, which is another situation. So right now they're trying to spread the crews all over the Bay Area. We're getting a lot of equipment right here. They brought a chopper in earlier. They airdropped some equipment to the top of the deck, which was really the problem before, so they could get access to the top. Now the work is going to begin, and it's going to be a very interesting scene around here tonight, and everybody is just on pins and needles to find out whether or not there are more survivors, and at this point there is some optimism. It is possible there could be more.
Okay, Linda, thank you very much.
For that. Rescue crews in Santa Cruz, just 10 miles from the earthquake's epicenter, are now searching through rubble for yesterday's earthquake victims. And our Mark Brown joins us now by telephone from Santa Cruz with the very latest there. Mark?
Well, Harold, things are far from normal, and they won't be for some time. And there are hints tonight that tensions have increased among the city's police force. I'll have more on that in just a moment. Now, with each passing hour, more and more sectors of the city of Santa Cruz are getting their power turned back on. The southern portion of the city appeared to be the first to have the lights turned back on. We're told others will follow in the hours to come. Businesses are starting to open up, restaurants, grocery stores. People are able to buy supplies and food. All of this little more than 24 hours after it all began. On the downside, 2 more bodies were found this morning in the ruins of the Pacific Garden Mall, bringing the total to 4 there. Search teams have used specially trained dogs, and now they're using high-tech equipment in an effort to locate the bodies, living or dead, that might be in the rubble. Now, although hope would diminish with each passing hour, you have to remember people were pulled alive from the ruins of the Mexico City earthquake weeks after the disaster happened. Now, here's more on the tension, apparently, among some members of the Santa Cruz Police Department. Now, earlier at 5, I told you how police were starting to cordon off larger and larger sections of downtown where a lot of that devastation had occurred, apparently trying to keep packs of young people and sightseers out of the area. Now, one of our cameramen, Eyewitness News cameraman Dave Klein, was stopped and handcuffed by police as he was trying to leave the area we were in. He found that he had to pass through some police cordons that hadn't been there before. The officers took exception to that. He says they grabbed him by the neck and slammed him against the car, handcuffed him, and then gave him a citation and let him go. This is something that we haven't really run into before here in Santa Cruz, and it's something that perhaps warrants looking into, but apparently an indication that officers who've been up an awful long time and who've been at this perhaps for 30 hours or more, some of them are starting to show the strain of what they've been having to deal with.
Okay, Mark.
Thank you. An explosion has just rocked a Caltrans paint yard beneath the Bay Bridge on the San Francisco side. This word just into us. There are no injuries from that blast, but right now the cause of the explosion, the extent of the damage, not known. It's also not known if this blast is related in any way to yesterday's earthquake that happened now about 25 hours ago. We have received word that the explosion did ignite a fire at that paint yard. The blaze is now under control.
Straight ahead right here, we'll get the latest from Caltech on the quake and the aftershocks. Plus, we'll see how Whittier is doing 2 years after Southern California's last big earthquake.
At the Caltech Seismology Lab, scientists are studying this earthquake very closely as they try to understand exactly how the quake was generated. Our Elaine Long is standing by there right now. She has a live report for us and fill us in. Elaine.
Well, Tawny, seismologists have been studying and monitoring this earthquake for the past 25 hours. They have learned that it is a strike-slip earthquake associated with the San Andreas Fault. But the geologists examining the San Andreas Fault are finding something quite unusual. They are finding no surface breaks, which is unusual for the magnitude of this earthquake. Now, joining me right now is Lisa Walsh. She's a seismologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. Now, what does this indicate? We don't see any surface breaks up there.
Right. This segment of the fault is notorious for the difficulty of finding surface breaks. In 1906, they got lost looking for surface rupture. So what it could mean is that it's just a very complicated area and we haven't found them even though they're there. On the other hand, if there really aren't any surface breaks, it means we probably have a little bit more to learn about large earthquakes on the San Andreas Fault.
But it's definitely on the San Andreas Fault.
It appears to be on the San Andreas Fault.
Okay. There have been several aftershocks and they have appeared to be diminishing in frequency and intensity. What is the chance that we're going to see a major aftershock, maybe comparable to the size of this earthquake from yesterday?
Okay, the USGS has just recently issued a statement saying that there is a less than 1% chance of a equal or greater magnitude earthquake occurring over the next 24 hours. Now, the percentages get a little higher. For smaller earthquakes, there's a 2% chance of a magnitude 6 or greater occurring and a 13% chance of a magnitude 5 or greater occurring.
Okay. Lisa Wall, thank you for joining us this evening. You heard it right here. The smaller aftershocks, of course, will be continuing for the next few days and several weeks, as is the case of the magnitude of this earthquake of this magnitude. This is Elaine Long reporting live from Caltech. Back to you, Harold and Tawny.
Thanks, Elaine. I'm not quite sure if these things ever calm me down. You know, a little information can be a dangerous thing sometimes. You know, it takes years for a community to recover from a major earthquake. No better evidence of that than the city of Whittier, as we see in this report from Eyewitness News reporter Barney Morris.
This broken building at the corner of Philadelphia and Comstock stands as a grim reminder of what happened here on October 1st, 1987. A little over 2 years ago, and yet the city of Whittier is still rebuilding. The Whittier earthquake came at 5 in the morning, before most people were on the streets, or at work, or at school. It registered 6.1 on the Richter scale, but was followed 3 days later by a 5.5 aftershock. And the aftershock really devastated the uptown section, destroying buildings that had been weakened by the original jolt. Nobody died in Whittier, although there were a couple of deaths caused by that quake in other communities nearby. Today, workers are still rebuilding the city. And City Manager Tom Mock says the rebuilding process was a long and difficult one.
We treat earthquakes or natural disasters, I guess I should say, in a phased way now. Phase 1 is the immediate crisis, which Northern California is in at the moment. Phase 2 is the cleanup. Phase 3 is the planning process to figure out what you're going to do in terms of rebuilding, and then finally the rebuilding process. We're in Phase 4, and I think very successfully there.
For many of the people of Whittier, the San Francisco quake brought back some painful memories of October 1987. The damage here was less than $100 million, but for a town of 74,000 people, it was a rugged blow, and recovery has been slow. Barney Morris, Channel 7 Eyewitness News, Whittier.
In the wake of yesterday's big earthquake, a lot of Southern Californians are asking an important question tonight. Could it trigger a similar quake here? The San Andreas Fault, which has now been blamed for the San Francisco quake, also passes through the Southland, of course. But with that in mind, geologists are warning us not to expect a domino effect.
The fact that there was an earthquake yesterday in San Francisco doesn't increase or decrease the chance of an earthquake in Southern California today.
Geologists tell us the Southland is honeycombed by fault lines, but they say the San Andreas is the one fault poised for the earliest explosion of power, in excess of 7.5 on the Richter scale.
Okay, with so many people living on or near a fault line, it is a must to be prepared. Bob Banfield looks at what we can learn from the Northern California experience.
Most geologists were surprised at where the rupture along the San Andreas Fault occurred yesterday. There has for years been speculation among experts that a damaging quake would occur along the southern section of the San Andreas, from the Cajon Pass to the Salton Sea. Professor Sean Beeler, geologist at the University of California, Riverside, expressed the opinion that Southern California is no more nor less likely to experience a major quake because of what happened yesterday. The professor, who teaches a class on how to live in earthquake country, offered opinions on why the damage was so great in San Francisco.
The area around the bay is built up on a lot of landfill. That's been going on for literally almost 100 years. So when you throw material into the bay muds, you have a very soft foundation. And that type of material becomes saturated with water and is very susceptible to ground shaking. And in fact, it undergoes something like liquefaction, quicksand developing. We could look at this as a three-decker freeway. You can see that if we put ground shaking on it from side to side, it will wobble but will not collapse. However, if I shake it in this fashion, without any cross supports on here, we wind up with the building going down in that fashion.
Professor Beeler indicated the Nimitz Freeway paralleled the fault line, making it more susceptible to failure because of the earth movement.
One of the important points made by Professor Beeler is that no matter how well constructed it is, because it's in a liquefaction zone, geologists are concerned how this freeway overpass connecting the 10 and 215 freeways in San Bernardino would withstand a strong earthquake. Bob Banfield, Channel 7 Eyewitness News, San Bernardino.
Okay, when we come right back, Henry Alfaro will join us and give us a rundown on earthquake insurance. Henry's next.
Late information, a developing story into Eyewitness News right now, taking place in the San Fernando Valley. You're looking at Ventura Boulevard, eastbound in Sherman Oaks, west of Coldwater, or Woodman Avenue, I should say. An RTD bus apparently involved in an accident with what we can determine right now to be a single car. The extent of injuries, if any at all, has not been determined just yet. We know that traffic is tied up there because a number of fire units have responded to the scene of that accident. So far, we have, once again, no reports of any fatalities or injuries, but we know that there is a lot of activity taking place on Ventura Boulevard, eastbound lanes in Sherman Oaks. Right now, a good place to avoid if you have to make your way through the San Fernando Valley tonight.
Okay, continuing here, earthquake insurance has been available in California for years, but most people haven't taken advantage of it, primarily because of the high cost and high deductible. Tonight, Henry Alfaro has some background on this form of protection for your home.
Well, Tony, it's estimated that about 20% of Bay Area homeowners who lost their homes yesterday had adequate earthquake insurance. Because of the devastation and the constant reminder that it could happen here, the need to reevaluate this kind of coverage, again, is a major consideration for local homeowners. Earthquake insurance generally does not cover mere wall cracks or fallen plaster. It covers damage caused by a violent action, one that completely destroys a home, knocks it off the foundation, causes it to rip apart or burn to the ground. Wayne Partee is a veteran insurance agent. He says that since a home is a person's biggest investment, earthquake insurance protects that investment.
There's a lot of people in San Francisco right now that are without earthquake insurance that wish they had bought it. The cost of a policy for $200,000 can range up to about $300 a year, between the $200 to $300. If you have a $200,000 policy, then your deductible is going to be the first $20,000 of damage. If you have $20,001 in damage, then you're going to get $1 from the insurance company.
So who needs earthquake insurance?
Everybody is a candidate to buy it. Everybody should have it. But it's not something that, you know, after an earthquake, right now we're in moratorium. Nobody right now can buy earthquake coverage. At their highest peak of awareness, the companies are shut off. And this will go anywhere from a week to 10 days to 30 days, depending on when the last major aftershock occurs in California.
Earthquake insurance, unlike automobile insurance, is strictly an option. However, a homeowner has a choice, and it boils down to this. Do I want to take a chance, or do I want to protect myself from losing my home in case there is a big one? Harold.
Yeah, he pays your money, you take your chances. Thanks, Hank. When we come right back, we'll have more on what Los Angeles can learn from the disaster in San Francisco. And in other news tonight, the Atlantis Space Shuttle.
The Northern California earthquake has almost completely overshadowed another major news story today. That is the launching of the space shuttle Atlantis. Rain had already delayed the takeoff for 6 days, but finally, the time for Atlantis had come.
4, 3, 2, 1. We have ignition and liftoff of Atlantis and the Galileo spacecraft bound for Jupiter.
The $2 billion spacecraft roared to life and soared away. Now, 2 minutes into its flight, it dropped its 2 booster rockets and continued on with its 3 inboard engines. Early this evening, 6 hours into its flight, the 2 female members of the 5-astronaut crew successfully fired the ship's cargo, the nuclear-powered Galileo probe, on its trip to Jupiter. That trip will take 6 years. The astronauts are going to land at Edwards Air Force Base next Monday. Harold.
Tawny, as the Bay Area struggles to get back on its feet, local officials today talking about what we're doing to help. And the deadly outcome also raised concerns about how Southland highways. Mayor Tom Bradley announced that city fire department officials and building inspectors are in the Bay Area. They'll help determine if buildings are safe to occupy up there. The deadly collapse of the Nimitz Freeway raised questions about plans for this stretch of the Harbor Freeway near the Coliseum. Plans to add a transitway drew opposition from local officials. But Caltrans isn't worried.
I have a great deal of faith in our engineering design and what we've learned through earthquakes, and you know, it's just like buildings. The newer buildings are much safer than the old buildings.
Old buildings are another concern, of course. As many as 100,000 people live in unreinforced masonry buildings. Owners of those buildings have not complied with LA's earthquake upgraded laws, and today the City Council discussed ways of trying to enforce the law before it's too late.
And still ahead, Harold, Dr. George will have the word on the Southern California heat wave, and we'll also have the latest on plans for the quake interruption.
Jim Hill with sports, and Jim, they're talking about resuming the World Series next week. What do you think about that?
Well, Commissioner Fay Vincent said that it will resume next Tuesday in San Francisco, Games 3 and 4, Game 5, if necessary, up there. Engineers at the forum last night told me that they think that they should have at least 10 days, maybe even 2 weeks, in order to inspect a structure like Candlestick Park up in San Francisco because of aftershocks. Personally, a lot of people might think this is kind of strange coming from me, but I think they should just cancel the World Series as of right now. We're talking about about death and destruction. They should take the total purse of money, take it and divide it in half. Give half of it to the players, give the other half to our neighbors up north. Companies that have bought commercial time should give part of those monies also to our neighbors up north. There are many office pools all over Southern California. We have an office pool right here at Channel 7. We should take that money and donate it also to our neighbors up north because they need all the help and the money that they can get. And if and when the big one happens to us here in Southern California, we're also going to get a heck of a lot of help. Personally, I really feel that, well, it makes us in sports look kind of selfish, maybe even a little bit foolish, if all we can think of is just trying to get in our own little games, as I mentioned before when we're talking about death and destruction, because after all, we can't get help from others if we don't help ourselves.
Strong words, Jim. Well spoken. Okay. Thank you very much. All right, Dr. George, right now, hot. Right here in Southern California, to say the least.
Let's start right off and see what the conditions are and what they have been. Right now, oh, the sky has high, thin, scattered clouds. Temperature 84, wind southwest at 10 and the barometer is 29.95. All right, today, look at that, a 95. It was hot, just as Tawny said. We had a mild Santa Ana. It started out early this morning, and it won't last, though. One more day. How about one more day? Lancaster, 85, Big Bear, Ontario and Riverside in the upper 90s, Palm Springs 101, San Diego 80, Newhall, and look at the 90s right down there, Woodland Hills, Burbank, San Gabriel, Long Beach, and it's nice and cool along the ocean. Now, this is what's happening around the country. Big high-pressure system aloft is connected with what we've got down here, because down on the surface our high pressure is over here, and there's a front coming in, rain already up there in the Pacific Northwest, lots of rain over on the other side, and we'll be telling you more about that in the second half, because in the second half is when we've got the temperatures and everything else around the country. But this is the one that we've got now. Most of the country appears to be clear, doesn't it? Oh, yes, it does. It's clear and cold. How cold is it? Look at that. Tonight slows down in the 10s and the 20s. And it's all sinking further and further south. We can have frost and freezing down in Alabama tonight, perhaps with snow at the higher elevations. Where? Alabama. All right. We'll have more of that when we come back in the second half. There are our numbers. We'll get nice warm air for one more day, and then drops 24 degrees, 23, 24 degrees.
Something, huh? All right, George, thanks. That's Eyewitness News for now. Stay tuned for ABC's World News Tonight and a special report on the earthquake. Eyewitness News will be back tonight with a special edition at 10 o'clock, a full hour's coverage. Until then, have a nice night, all.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Reporting tonight from San Francisco.
Tonight, in fact, from the badly damaged Marina District of San Francisco. But the good news is this. Despite what you see going on behind me, they're taking down a building in the Marina District because it's a threat to public safety. Despite that, San Francisco is still standing. All along the San Andreas Fault, years of anticipation and years of preparation have paid off. For the most part. The worst news is this. In one location on the Oakland side of the San Francisco Bay, more than 250 people may have died in one location. And they may have died in part because of government neglect.
When a mile-long section of Highway 880, the Nimitz Freeway on the Oakland side of the bay, suddenly pancaked onto the lower roadway, hundreds of people were on their way home from work. According to officials in Alameda County, more than 250 of them never had even a chance. They were crushed beneath tons and tons of concrete and steel. Rescue teams have worked throughout the night and day, but only a handful of people escaped or were freed alive. Those who did make it out alive were rescued by local residents who came to the scene as quickly as they could, only with car jacks and crowbars.
The people couldn't say anything. They were just in shock. People the eyes were pulling back in their heads, rolling around. They were dazed. They didn't know where they were. All they knew that someone was helping them.
Into the bay, crushing others. This home video shows what it was like atop the bridge as the quake hit. A moment of sheer terror. Authorities say it will be at least 3 weeks before the bridge reopens, completely disrupting life for thousands of Bay Area commuters.
And late this afternoon, the Transportation Secretary Samuel Skinner said it would probably be a year and a half before this section of freeway is reopened. Meanwhile, state officials have promised a thorough investigation of why it collapsed. Tom?
George, I think that there are, more than 300,000 people who commute from East Oakland into the San Francisco area every day. They're going to have some means of getting to work. Are there any alternative plans at this time?
They're talking about reinforcing BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, the subway that goes under the bay. Apparently, it was not heavily damaged by the quake. They're hoping to lay on extra trains throughout the day and night. They're talking about going to a 24-hour schedule, but it's still going to mean a major disruption for the people who live here.
They're going to have the San Francisco equivalent of Dunkirk with a lot of boats, perhaps, as well.
Well, they've got ferry boats now lined up to take people back and forth across the bay, hearkening back to the days before the Bay Bridge and before the BART system.
All right, thank you very much, George Lewis, tonight. In Oakland, San Francisco, of course, is the heart of the Bay Area, and this is a city that was leveled by a great earthquake and fires in 1906. This time, it came through in much better condition, but this neighborhood, it's called the Marina District, was hard hit. It is built on a floodplain hard by the Golden Gate Bridge and the Presidio, for those of you who are familiar with the San Francisco area. And these are elegant homes, many of them built more than 60 years ago. We get a report tonight on what's been going on in San Francisco from NBC's Don Oliver.
Most of San Francisco remained undamaged after the quake, but power was still out in the downtown area today. Without signals, traffic was snarled. One area of the city was hit hard, the Marina, not far from the Golden Gate Bridge. Thousands of curious poured into the neighborhood to stare at the warped and twisted buildings. And watch firemen continue to pour water on the remains of an apartment building and 2 homes. Most of San Francisco, the hilly part, is built on solid rock. But this was once part of San Francisco Bay. It's all reclaimed land. The quake turned it into a bowl of jello, and 4-story buildings were shook to the ground. The fires were believed to have resulted from broken natural gas lines. During the night, rescue workers looked for survivors in the damaged buildings and guarded against looters. Today, Mayor Art Agnos said the citizens of San Francisco were well behaved.
The crime was way below average. The bookings were down, the arrests were down.
Today, the grim search for bodies began. They used chainsaws to attempt to clear away the debris, but finally gave up, saying the job was too dangerous. They know that the bodies of 2 people are in this building, but firemen are reluctant to go after them.
This was a 4-story building. There's only 2 stories above the ground now. How are you going to get at them? And we can't risk sending a crew in if this is going to topple over.
Vice President Quayle toured the area by helicopter and then surveyed the marina damage from the ground. He promised quick federal assistance. Residents were warned not to enter buildings in the marina until they are judged to be safe. Some took great chances anyway in order to salvage their belongings. Everyone is concerned about a big aftershock knocking damaged buildings to the ground.
Please use the sidewalk so we can get emergency vehicles into this area.
Despite the warnings, the crowds continued to pour into the marina to see for themselves what the second worst earthquake in the nation's history had done to the city by the bay. Don Oliver, NBC News, San Francisco.
Altogether, damage was scattered over a 100-mile area of the San Francisco Bay. Santa Cruz, which is right on the Pacific Ocean about 75 miles south of here near Monterey and Carmel, was the epicenter. And NBC's Roger O'Neill is there tonight.
The earthquake moved down Pacific Avenue in Santa Cruz with a vengeance. Most of the 60 stores in the 6-block-long Garden Mall were destroyed. 2 people were killed there.
We are in for a long-term rebuilding project in this community, both residentially and commercially. We need to hang together, and we're going to do that.
The oceanfront community may not get its electricity back for 3 days. The water supply is contaminated, and the sewers aren't working. Only a handful of stores were open today. Residents spent hours waiting in line to buy bottled water and bread. Only one customer at a time was served.
Fluid, hot dogs, Pepsi, 6-pack root beer, bread, chips.
Earthen dam reservoirs, though, in the mountains above the town held. It was the only good news Santa Cruz had.
I don't know if this isn't the big one. I don't know what would be left of this town if we got anything bigger than what we had.
The National Guard was activated to help police patrol the streets. County officials said damages here, where the earthquake started, would exceed $500 million. Roger O'Neill, NBC News, Santa Cruz.
California has 6 nuclear power plants altogether, none of them damaged by the earthquake. Rancho Seco, which is near Sacramento just north of here, and Diablo, just south of here, are open and doing business. The federal government is deeply involved in the emergency rescue operation going on here. President Bush has declared 7 counties in Northern California federal disaster areas. NBC's Robert Hager in Washington has been following that part of the story.
In Washington, an army of federal and private workers began organizing a huge relief effort. President Bush, who will visit the scene late this week, grabbed a phone himself at one point.
Jeff, this is the president. How is it doing out there? What are you getting a lot of requests for emergency medical service?
The Red Cross is offering nurses, medicine, blood, and setting up shelters. The U.S. military is standing by to help clear debris if needed. The Agriculture Department is making surplus food available. And FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, will take applications for financial help. Grants of up to $10,000 to hard-hit individuals, along with money for temporary housing and to repair homes, highways, and bridges. FEMA's Grant Peterson on his workers' efforts so far.
And I'm proud of what they have done under the most disastrous, compounding, continual catastrophic events to hit the United States in a century.
Peterson refers to twin disasters. Hurricane Hugo first, now the earthquake, guaranteed to cost the U.S. government well over the $1.1 billion allocated so far. And the earthquake alone may cost insurance companies another $1 billion, according to industry sources. FEMA says it'll set up claim offices for people in California within several days and promise to act on requests in about a week. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
It is also worth noting that in recent years, federal money for removing earthquake hazards has been significantly reduced. In a moment, we'll come back with the story of the Earthquake World Series. What happens now? Back in a moment.
I'm Mary Alice Williams, NBC News, New York. Baseball Commissioner Fay Vincent announced tonight that he expects the World Series to resume next Tuesday in San Francisco's Candlestick Park. Vincent said he wants to have total confidence in the stadium, that the 62,000 fans will be safe. We get more on the Quake Series tonight from NBC's Bob Jameson.
The earthquake hit Candlestick when most of the 60,000 fans were in their seats for the pregame ceremonies. There was an immediate power failure and an abrupt end to television transmission. The huge stadium rocked and girders bent, but there was no panic, not even in the upper reaches of the ballpark. When the tremor ended, most fans and ball players sat or stood, stunned by the suddenness and force of the shock.
I've lived here all my life, and it never scared me in an earthquake. That was the first one that scared me.
I'm just a little shook up by the whole thing, you know.
There was an orderly exit, some fans carrying chunks of concrete shaken loose by the quake. The quake also damaged Oakland's Coliseum, raising the prospect that neither ballpark would be safe for fans. Baseball officials immediately began exploring an unprecedented move of the series from its home ballparks to a neutral city. But Commissioner Fay Vincent emerged from his second meeting of the day with city officials and officers of both ball clubs to say the series would go ahead in the Bay Area. Vincent said he expects the series to resume Tuesday after repairs to Candlestick. But that was not baseball's main concern in the delay.
Our concerns, despite this rather large gathering, our issue is really a modest one in light of the great tragedy that's hit this area. We had Commander Nelson from the San Francisco Police, and he tells us that there are a number of dead, that the search for victims goes on, and that this community is still reeling from the effects of the disaster.
While city officials were reluctant to resume play before next week,
Both they and Vincent hope the series will aid the Bay Area's recovery. Bob Jamieson, NBC News, San Francisco. Civic pride does die hard. When I suggested to one San Franciscan that maybe they could move the World Series to a neutral site like Dodger Stadium, she said to me, "Los Angeles, are you kidding? No way." On Wall Street today, there was some selling off of insurance companies as a result of the earthquake, but it was only a ripple, and the Dow ended up closing higher. This San Francisco experience, of course, will only raise more questions about the science of predicting earthquakes and seismology. We have more on that tonight from NBC News science correspondent Robert Bazell.
San Francisco's 1906 earthquake was 30 times more powerful than the one that struck yesterday. Scientists do not classify yesterday's earthquake as catastrophic.
This is exactly the type of earthquake that we've been expecting to occur in the San Francisco area. Last year there were reports put out that there was a 30% chance within the next 10 to 30 years or so that this type of earthquake would occur in the Bay Area.
The portion of the San Andreas Fault that caused yesterday's quake is to the south of the region responsible for the 1906 disaster. Faults appear underground in places where huge sections of the earth, called plates, push together. As the plates move slowly over many years, pressure builds up until, like yesterday, it is released suddenly. The scientists expect aftershocks for many days, but in the long term, they say, the danger from that portion of that fault is lessened. Researchers point out that much of the Bay Area is landfill where there used to be water, and that is where the worst damage occurred. When the quake struck bedrock, it jerked sharply, but caused little damage. But the landfill, which is soft, rolled in waves, so damage was more severe. Scientists say that the next catastrophic earthquake they expect will strike not in the Bay Area, but in Southern California.
I believe that we're going to have to take very seriously the possibility of and the probability of earthquakes in other parts of California.
The scientists expect that earthquake will cause massive damage. Robert Bazell, NBC News.
When the earthquake struck in Armenia, more than 25,000 people were killed there, of course, and the United States offered and delivered assistance. Well, today, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev offered the assistance of the Soviet Union to the people of Northern California. There was also an offer of assistance from Japan, which has had a lot of experience with earthquakes, of course, and at the same time, Japan has a large cultural and financial investment in this area. We'll be back with more after this. In other news tonight, in East Germany, a major event on the political seismic scale, the resignation of Erich Honecker as that country's Communist Party leader. Profound change. NBC's Arthur Kent tonight in East Germany.
An active communist from the age of 8, Erich Honecker left power today as the symbol of all that is wrong in East Germany. It was Honecker who supervised building of the Berlin Wall. Honecker, who resisted Gorbachev's perestroika and whose resignation was demanded by angry East Germans in this month's pro-reform demonstrations. Reformers welcome his departure, but complain that his replacement, Egon Krenz, is no improvement. Krenz said tonight East Germany can no longer resist Gorbachev-style reforms, but by reputation he's a hardliner reluctant to change.
There will be modifications, slices of reform, if you will, that is always very well calculated.
At reform rallies like this one last night in Dresden, Krenz and top party members are declared unacceptable to lead reform. Here, city authorities have tried to silence protest by talking with citizen groups. But the message from the people of Dresden is clear. We will wait peacefully for change, but we will not wait forever. So unless Egon Krenz, the hardliner, becomes an overnight convert to reform, East Germany's political crisis could deepen, not fade away. Arthur Kent, NBC News, Dresden, East Germany.
On the California coast, an earthquake on the Florida coast, the successful launch of the shuttle Atlantis today.
We have ignition and liftoff of Atlantis and the Galileo spacecraft bound for Jupiter.
Atlantis thundered into orbit with the nuclear-powered Galileo on board. Galileo will be released this evening for its 6-year journey to Jupiter. Clear skies let cameras on the ground get dramatic pictures of the shuttle's separation from its booster rockets. The shuttle is scheduled to return to Earth next Monday. And we'll return to San Francisco with the story of the city's unique residents in just a moment. Two views of San Francisco tonight. This residential area closed off because of earthquake damage. And at the end of the street, Golden Gate Bridge. The risk and reward of living in this beautiful city. A city that is very difficult to leave even after an earthquake. Here is NBC's Bob Dotson.
1801 Beach Street looks like a piece from a child's board game that ended angrily. Police lines warned neighbors not to risk their lives. But Aideen Murphy couldn't get home last night. All she has in the world was in her apartment, 4 flights up these rickety stairs.
Well, I lived through the Battle of Britain in London.
She passed Barbara Stinn, who lives on the 2nd floor. Barbara retired here from Cleveland just last month to be near her son, Brad.
How did you convince them to come here?
Great weather, easy walking distance, no problems. I like.
Brad Stinn crosses the Bay Bridge every day at 5.
Stay here and watch the stuff.
He left early yesterday to go to the series. Missed the bridge's collapse by 8 minutes.
We're okay.
Remarkably, no one was injured here. It is harder to be brave the day after reason returns and the sun reveals the odds. But Aideen pressed on. An earthquake is different from other disasters. No warning, no wind, no rain. Just 15 seconds of terror that snatches the rug from under your life.
I'd like to help you. Yeah.
When the biggest piece of your life sits cracked in the street, you search for something the shifting earth did not touch.
It made it.
Aideen bought $2,000 worth of Wedgwood china last week.
Oh, wow, it's okay.
She invited us back for tea someday. She says she'll stay in San Francisco. Bob Dotson, NBC News, in the Tilted House on Beach Street.
Everyone feels a claim on San Francisco, even people who have never visited this city. After all, its transcendent beauty and style makes us all proud, whatever our hometown. And I can tell you as well that we should be doubly proud tonight given the conduct of San Franciscans and people throughout the Bay Area in the face of this tragedy and major disruption of their lives. Can you believe this? In intersections, no traffic lights, and yet calmness prevails. Courtesy is the word of the day. I don't know what it's like where you live, but in New York City, not a chance. Tonight at 10, 9 Central Time, we'll have a special report. The earthquake aftershock. I'll see you then. For now, I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News in San Francisco. Thank you for joining us.
Just a couple of seconds, I was afraid that the upper deck would collapse.
Millions tuned in to watch baseball on TV. Instead, they saw a devastating earthquake. This is Entertainment Tonight for Wednesday, October the 18th, 1989. Hello, everyone. I'm John Tesh in Hollywood.
And I'm Mary Hart in New York. And hi there, John. Obviously, the big news is back there on the West Coast.
The eyes of the world were on San Francisco last night as a television audience in the millions waited for Game 3 of the World Series. As the clock ticked past 5, the pregame show began on ABC with Al Michaels and Tim McCarver at the mic, and then disaster struck.
At 5:04 p.m., ABC was warming up the audience with highlights from Game 2.
So the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having an For Al Michaels and Tim McCarver, it was a nerve-rattling moment.
And I said, boy, Parker must have hit that ball hard. And Al said, what we have just what you folks have just seen is the most historic opening in the history of television sports.
Frankly, for just a couple of seconds, I was afraid that the upper deck would collapse.
NBC's Bob Costas was also in the press box.
As a group, sports writers tend to be cynical, and they were nervous titters at first. But then after it stopped, you saw the blood drain from people's faces, and they couldn't hide how shaken they were by it.
The earthquake knocked the World Series coverage off the air, and the game itself had to be canceled. For a few dazed minutes on ABC, America saw Roseanne. News organizations were scrambling. At Candlestick Park, sports reporters all of a sudden had a bigger story to cover, and athletes became witnesses.
First of all, your primary concern is like, where's my family, where's my kids, my wife?
On the West Coast, news coverage was almost continuous. And in the rest of the country, most of the primetime schedule was preempted by news coverage of the earthquake. It was a difficult story to cover.
Nobody seems to know exactly what's going on.
In San Francisco, there were massive power outages. The NBC station put its news anchors in the streets and went on the air with a portable generator. There was sensational home video on the Bay Bridge where a big chunk had collapsed. Thomas and Debbie Kelly of Oklahoma City captured this accident.
Oh my gosh.
There was, of course, true drama everywhere. When this section of freeway collapsed, scores of people were killed, and others were trapped as television focused on it live.
Girl 9 has already been taken out of the car and to the hospital, but her brother, a 7-year-old boy, is still up there, and they are working right now on trying to get him out.
As Major League Baseball works out the rescheduling of the remaining games of the World Series in Los Angeles, there is another footnote to this story. Universal Studios has temporarily shut down one of its attractions, the Earthquake Ride, which simulates a quake of an 8+ magnitude. Mary?
Since the Our Gang comedy shows first went on television in the mid-50s, probably not a day has gone by without an episode being broadcast somewhere in the free world. Generations grew up with Our Gang amid laughter and good times. But in real life, things did not always turn out so well as members of Our Gang grew up. And that's our inside story for today.
Okay, Greg Dobbs, thank you very much. Over on 880, it's worth remembering that in other earthquakes, Romania, Italy, Mexico, people have lived as long as 3 weeks. And tiny children, babies particularly, lived long times because they weren't afraid, not old enough to know that they were afraid. You may remember those tiny infants rescued after so long in Mexico City. Now, we mentioned that the World Series has been put off until next Tuesday. Standing by, giving us a few minutes of his time over in Candlestick Park, is the baseball commissioner and our own reporter for sports and for news, Al Michaels. Commissioner, let me ask you first, do you think this has had a devastating effect on baseball? I find that today people are almost embarrassed to talk about baseball in the wake of all this death.
Well, I think you make a good point. The priority here has got to be the community and the safety and protection of the citizens. We know our place, and our place is to wait very quietly until the community is able to enjoy baseball again, and we believe that will be at some point next week.
So would you just restate what you think will happen? What stadium will you open in?
Well, I believe we'll play here at Candlestick, where Al and I are sitting at the moment. I believe it'll be Tuesday, but we need to be sure from the community and from the police that they're going to be in a position to support baseball next Tuesday. So we are planning for Tuesday, but we are certainly aware that it may be delayed.
Commissioner, obviously one of the questions is in regard to the structural integrity of both stadiums.
Exactly.
First, tell us about Candlestick Park, and then what you know about the Oakland Coliseum as well.
Well, I think the news is good for both of these stadia. I think the Candlestick situation is that we found some areas that we need to do some repairs to. We don't believe the damage is at all serious, and we know we are able to fix it. The question is, how long will it take? We think it'll be 3 days, and there's no serious damage here. At Oakland, there's no damage to speak of at all. So we know we can play baseball in these two ballparks as soon as it's appropriate.
Did you consider at all today the possibility of playing at a neutral site, or will you consider perhaps in the near future that eventuality?
Well, certainly that possibility was discussed. It's not a very attractive possibility, and I think it's functionally been ruled out by me.
All right, back to you, Peter.
Commissioner, thanks very much. And Al, we'll see you later in the broadcast, but as the commissioner points out, baseball has its place, and around San Francisco and the Bay Area today, people are still preoccupied with the devastation this earthquake caused to their friends, to their colleagues, and in many cases to their homes. We'll talk to the Vice President a little later on, who's been out here to look at the damage today. And when we come back, why San Francisco and Oakland were not more damaged than they might have been.
ABC News continuing coverage of the Great Quake of '89. Brought to you by Subaru. Live from San Francisco, ABC News coverage of the Great Quake of '89 continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
Lest you wonder where we are, we're in the Marina District of San Francisco, not very far from Fisherman's Wharf. And here at the moment, they're continuing to search through one particular building in the hope of finding someone alive, though if there's someone alive in there, it'll be very hard to hear them. They do know of at least a couple of people who perished in this building. And if you happen to watch ABC's World News Tonight earlier this evening, that was a whole building just 2 or 3 hours ago, and they had torn it down. The local police chief says that most people in the neighborhood have been accounted for, so they don't believe seriously that there is anybody there alive. The seismologist had predicted an earthquake of this magnitude for some time, though earthquake predicting is still a very primitive science. In other parts of the world at times, it has been almost heartbreaking to see how ill-prepared people have been. Only in Japan and in California do people seem to really take earthquakes seriously and prepare for them. ABC's Bill Blakemore has covered earthquakes for us all over the world.
San Francisco was built for this. They were prepared.
But we didn't see any real failures of any of the newer structures, which is what we would have expected for an earthquake of this size.
A few old buildings in San Francisco's Marina area where officials had expected trouble did fall or burn. But the same massive forces, 7 points on the Richter scale, last year demolished whole cities in Soviet Armenia and led to weeks of sad searching in the rubble of countless buildings. In downtown San Francisco yesterday, 7 points on the Richter scale merely loosened some bricks and this upstairs corner on a handful of old buildings, while the towering glass walls of the modern skyscrapers lost not one window pane as they swayed in the shocks, just as they were designed to. And since it is collapsing buildings which do almost all the killing in earthquakes, the death count throughout the Bay Area was very low, with the one horrible exception of the crumbling double-decker Nimitz Freeway in Oakland. Some 200 people crushed in their cars on the lower deck. One of the structures built 3 decades ago, before anti-earthquake concrete construction was well understood.
They tend to be brittle, they tend to have very little seismic resistance, and when they collapse catastrophically, they pancake.
In all the rest of Oakland, California, aside from the fact that most people took today off, things could hardly be more normal. The 3 other isolated trouble spots here are already being studied by engineers. The Marina District.
Well, we expected damage in the Marina because it's built on fill that was put in there after the earthquake in 1906.
The fallen Bay Bridge section.
The Bay Bridge was a surprise. We expected the bridge to perform without any damage.
And some of the downtown buildings in Santa Cruz.
The damage tended to be in older brick buildings. Unreinforced brick starts to peel apart and pancake.
Everywhere else, the Bay Area's years of constantly improving anti-earthquake building codes have paid off. Even water and gas lines, for the most part, held. In the years since the dramatic 1906 San Francisco earthquake drew attention to the San Andreas Fault, a series of smaller quakes have brought lessons slowly enough for engineers to absorb.
We keep finding mistakes, we keep finding oversights, we keep finding new things about how buildings perform, and not every earthquake is the same.
And if this earthquake had been 7.5 instead of 7 on the scale, about 5 times more powerful as the Richter scale goes, well, even the best anti-earthquake design can only do so much.
If the quake was much larger, we'd have many more buildings like the Cypress overstructure collapsing, and it would be a major disaster because we wouldn't have been able to respond.
Bay Area engineers will now add the few new lessons of this quake to their already enviable body of anti-earthquake knowledge and building standards to get ready for the next big one, whenever it should come. But the biggest lesson of this quake may not be for people who live in California.
If we had a similar quake in the Northeast, the Southeast, or the Central States where they don't have adequate building codes, we'd have an absolute catastrophic disaster with tens of thousands of buildings coming down.
Engineers here say San Francisco's success so far in learning to live with the Earth's deep forces should be an example. Bill Blakemore, ABC News, San Francisco.
It is stunning when you think of it. The difference between an earthquake at 7 on the Richter scale and 7.5 is 5 times more powerful. How little we seem to know of earthquakes and their innate power. Joining us to help us understand a little better at the National Research Center in Golden, Colorado, Bruce Presgrave, and at Cornell University in New York, the seismologist Thomas O'Rourke. Mr. Presgrave, let me ask you first what's on a lot of people's minds here, aftershock. What do you think we can expect, if anything, and of what magnitude?
Well, so far what we've seen is a fair number of aftershocks, but so far they've all been quite low. The biggest aftershock that we have recorded here was 4.7 on the Richter scale. I would say there's a good possibility that aftershocks may continue for the next few hours or days, sometimes even possibly weeks. But generally, we would expect that as time goes on, the aftershocks will get generally smaller in magnitude and less frequent in occurrence.
So the conventional wisdom that we may have a big aftershock here towards the end of the week is just that, it's just conventional wisdom, is it?
Well, we can't rule out that possibility, but I would say as time goes on, it would get less and less likely.
Dr. O'Rourke at Cornell, there's enormous frustration, as you know, on occasions like this, as to why we aren't able to predict earthquakes better. What's the bottom line?
Well, Peter, I think that, and greetings from Ithaca, I think part of the problem in predicting earthquakes is that the forces that are generated are very difficult to understand. There are a variety of different fault mechanisms, and there are problems in sorting these things out in the various geological circumstances. We're joined here by Professor Brian Isaacs, who's a seismologist at Cornell University, who's participating in this interview with me as an earthquake engineer.
Well, I'm very glad to have him there with you. Professor Isaacs, I didn't know you were there, but perhaps you can tell us, why can't we do a better job of predicting earthquakes?
We simply don't understand enough about the physics of earthquake occurrence to predict the exact time and place. We do, however, have a statistical feeling for how often earthquakes occur in certain places. And in fact,
are we getting better as time goes by?
Yes, in fact, this area was targeted as a high probability area for earthquake occurrence by the U.S. Geological Survey.
Can I come back to you, Mr. Presgrave, because you've been in this part of the country. I agree, machines can monitor this part of the country from everywhere. But just to remind people how widely or broadly this earthquake was felt?
Okay, the information that we have so far was that the earthquake was felt as far to the south as the San Fernando Valley, part of Los Angeles, and as far to the east as the Reno, Tahoe, and adjacent areas of western Nevada.
And the other thing that you hear in San Francisco today, I'll toss this up to all of you, this was not the big one. Dr. Presgrave, this was not the big one in your estimation, and should this part of the world still look forward to the big one?
I would say that is correct. Generally, I think most people referring to the big one are talking about the area north and northeast of Los Angeles on the San Andreas Fault. And that study that Dr. Isaacs referred to gave a 60% probability of a major quake, magnitude 7.5 or bigger, in that area north of Los Angeles in the next 30 years. And I would say that today's or yesterday's earthquake up in the Bay Area would have had no effect at all on those probabilities down in the southern part of the fault.
Dr. Presgrave, Dr. O'Rourke, and Dr. Isaacs, thank you very much for joining us. If I appear to be shouting at you, it's because there's a generator going behind me. And they have indeed found in that building within the last couple of minutes what they anticipated to find. Not one, but 2 other casualties of this earthquake of '89 in San Francisco. Vice President Quayle's plane has just landed in Washington. We anticipate talking to him. We'll be back in just a minute.
Since the beginning of this century, 6 major killer earthquakes have exceeded the destructive power of last evening's San Francisco quake. The biggest was the Alaska quake of 1964, which registered 8.5 on the Richter scale. The Great Quake of '89, an ABC News special, will continue in a moment. The Great Quake of '89 continues. Once again, here's Peter Jennings.
All this talk today about how well the region has done, that is to say how efficient the rescue teams have been, how good the morale of the people have been, is one thing. All this talk about the resilience in the Bay Area of San Francisco and Oakland is another. But getting these two cities particularly to run at the peak of efficiency they're accustomed to is quite another. It's an enormous challenge for the city and for the state and for the federal government. You do not put bridges and highways back together again overnight. Here's ABC's Tom Jarrell.
San Francisco. Until last night, this was San Francisco. Until last night. Now it looks like this, and this, and this. How does San Francisco recover? Already there's some discernible progress. Thanks to a professional fire department assisted by volunteers, the fires of last night are out. Although the Pacific Bell telephone system faltered with gridlock,
due to the earthquake in the area you are calling, your call cannot be completed at this time.
Once the overload ended, the phone system was found to be undamaged. Water mains, which snap like matchsticks, will take longer to repair. The hardest blow was to the Bay Area's bridges, roads, and superhighways. The Bay Bridge connecting Oakland and San Francisco normally carries more traffic than the combined total for 8 other toll bridges in the area. Experience has shown repairing such spans over water is slow and expensive. In 1983, the Interstate 95 bridge over Connecticut's Mianus River, for example, took 6 months and $10 million to repair. Experts feel the Bay Bridge will cost about the same, but be fixed sooner.
The Bay Bridge will probably take a few months. They may be able to get the lower roadway open within a month or two.
And one of the key approaches to the Bay Bridge is the 2-tiered Highway 880. When a mile of this highway fell, it entombed motorists traveling on the lower level.
And short of a war, you would never expect to see that kind of devastation on a major facility.
Until the Bay Bridge can be reopened, BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, is its best hope. This subway connects the two cities, tunneling beneath the bay. It escaped the quake undamaged. To make do, extra parking lots will be built in Oakland so cars can be left behind. Work shifts will be staggered to reduce the rush hour. And old tourist ferry boats will be pressed into service. Improvisation, it's the stuff upon which great cities survive and rebuild in times of disaster. Peter?
Thank you, Tom Jarrell. We're back in the Marina District of San Francisco, and there's full-scale activity here now trying to take down another building. The reason they've begun again so aggressively to bring down this building and a number of others which the city authorities deem unsafe is because they indeed have found the 2 bodies they were looking for. And as the firemen go away, the firefighters in San Francisco go away, they confirm that it was a man and it was a woman, and they were in their mid-30s. Until about a month ago, unless you were personally involved in a disaster like this, an earthquake or a hurricane, you may never have heard of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's the federal agency which is supposed to coordinate what all federal agencies can do to help in a situation like this. President Bush made a highly publicized visit to FEMA headquarters in Washington this morning, and FEMA has taken a very highly visible position in trying to help in this particular earthquake. FEMA has something of an image problem from the hurricane at Charleston in South Carolina. Here's ABC's Mike Von Friend.
The streets of downtown Charleston look normal now, but in the suburbs it is a different story. 3 weeks after the storm, areas remain overwhelmed with debris. Michelle Klein's 4th child was born a week after Hugo hit. Her family spent 2 weeks in a flooded house without electricity or running water. She says she prays that the people of San Francisco get help sooner than she did.
With the earthquake victims, I hope they get out there quicker because it's not fair. It's not fair. If it shouldn't be like that, then get out there quick and help those people. You just can't leave people homeless with kids and diapers.
In the aftermath of Hugo, Charleston became a city of lines. Residents had to wait for everything. And the mayor said again today that the federal government, and particularly FEMA, should have moved faster.
What there is needed is kind of a SWAT team. What we didn't have and what would have been so helpful is kind of for FEMA to come in proactive.
The FEMA command center here now has a staff of 450. The agency has already given grants to residents totaling more than $4 million. The man who is running this operation says the agency has learned from Hugo, but insists the criticism is unfounded.
Not one call, not one single call occurred during those first few days of where is FEMA's recovery assistance, because people were dealing with real live crisis emergency situations. Those should be dealt with on the front end. Then we will deal with recovery.
But many of those receiving grants complain about all the red tape.
We got paperwork about this thick, so you have to fill out the paperwork, turn it in, and then you have to wait for your number to come up. It could be weeks.
While there's some frustration here with the federal response, the people of Charleston learn that what they can count on is the generosity of others. Food, clothing, and supplies came from across the country by the truckload. And Ray Gerard says the earthquake victims can expect the same.
I think have faith. Stick in there, and it'll all come right eventually.
Charlestonians have already sent one plane load of emergency supplies to San Francisco. They feel they know better than most what people by the Bay are going through tonight. Mike Von Fremd, ABC News, Charleston.
Joining us live now from Charleston in South Carolina, Mayor Joseph O'Reilly. Mayor Riley, you've been through it. You've worked with FEMA as you look at San Francisco. What advice do you give that federal agency?
Well, I hope they'll move quicker than they did here at the beginning. We learned that when we were in extremis that there just wasn't the proactive element. What we needed was for FEMA to come in and not, as they said, do an assessment about how many generators you need. There really should be a proactive response of truckloads of generators and water and frankly, what I feel that we need for the first phase of a major disaster is really almost a military type activity where you've got the troops and the supplies and the manpower. They come in rather than say, give us an assessment before we can respond. That's what we needed in Charleston, and that would have immeasurably speeded up our recovery process.
Mayor, can I assume and beg you for a brief answer that you very much want the federal government's involvement, though?
Well, we need the federal government's involvement. We needed it at the beginning, and we need it throughout. This was a 500-mile hurricane, and we had plenty of warning, and FEMA could have been in here a heck of a lot sooner.
Thank you, Mayor, very much for taking the time to join us this evening. A lot of people out here actually were also in Charleston. I say that a number of people in the media have been here. Joining us this evening is the Associate Director of FEMA, Mr. Dennis Kwiatkowski. Mr. Kwiatkowski, they say this doesn't look as bad as Charleston. Does it look easier to you or easier to organize?
Well, any disaster of this size is never easy to organize. We're, of course, dealing with what is very close to a catastrophic situation. The Hurricane Hugo is significantly different than the earthquake with regard to the amount of warning we had, and also with regard to the amount of emergency needs that we had in Hurricane Hugo that do not appear to be evident. And I guess I would have to say that California was far more prepared for an event of this kind through many of the preparedness programs that we have been conducting out there in the past.
Mr. Kwiatkowski, I apologize. We're going to make this brief because the Vice President is standing by, but I thank you for your observations. We'll be back in just a moment.
The Richter scale is the system seismologists use to measure the magnitude of energy released during an earthquake. Each number on the scale represents an earthquake 10 times stronger than the next lower magnitude. In other words, Tuesday's 7.0 Temblor was less than 1/10 the strength of the 8.3 quake that struck the Bay Area.
Fly over the San Andreas Fault and find out why it's so dangerous. Then survivors relive the terror. Many say the big ones yet come. What it will feel like. Sam Donaldson is there. Watch Primetime Live tomorrow.
I was feeling pretty good when I saw my boy Joe in that new Oldsmobile. I thought Joe had finally matured some. But that new Cutlass Clay doesn't look like any Oldsmobile that I ever had. It's got something called a high output Quad 4 engine. The next thing you know, Joe will be bringing home girls.
This is not
the life.
No. It's pretty depressing, really. Walk through and there's places where, you know, it smells like death and it's not good.
I'm told crews are going to take one area at a time. They say one area takes maybe 5 or 6 hours, so we're not talking about a very big stretch of freeway here. They're digging in from the top and the bottom, and again, now they do have the equipment so they can start making some progress. Also, this is interesting, they're going to start making a chart of what actually they find inside, and apparently, probably tomorrow morning, they've got a lot of orange paint, and one of the rescue workers tells me that they're going to be painting some stripes along the side of the bridge here, maybe indicating just how many cars and how many people are trapped inside. So then when they start to lift the bridge up, they'll know exactly what they're going to be working with. As you can probably hear behind me, yes, they are working. There is a lot of noise, and there will be tomorrow. I think there's going to be a lot of activity here. Everybody right now is getting pretty tired. I think the activity will slow down, and all of us here are pretty tired too, and I think that's our cue to say goodnight. We will see you in the morning. Back to you in Hollywood.
All right, Linda.
Thanks,
and
Linda,
a cue
very
well
much.
taken for you.
Yeah.
She was up all night last night just getting there.
It's done real well.
The epicenter of this quake was, as you know by now, I'm sure, down near Santa Cruz, south of San Francisco, a quaint town. The property damage there in Santa Cruz estimated at $350 million. Rescue crews spent the day digging through the rubble of collapsed buildings there. Our Mark Brown is monitoring the situation there and joins us by telephone tonight. Mark, anything new?
Well, Paul, what they were searching for and digging through that rubble was a woman, either dead or alive, buried beneath the rubble of the Garden Pacific Mall. This is a search that's been in its second day, and it was called off right around sunset tonight. Authorities have been tipped by a friend or a co-worker that the woman was working in the building and had not escaped when the earthquake hit. When firefighters started pulling back tonight because of obvious safety concerns about being in these buildings after dark, some people in the crowd nearby shouted, "Don't stop, don't stop." The search, we're told, will continue tomorrow. Now, a 3-block stretch of Pacific Avenue was hit very hard by the quake in downtown Santa Cruz. Structural damage to those old buildings has rendered most of them, the bigger ones, uninhabitable. They will have to be torn down. In looking through Santa Cruz tonight, kind of patrol the area, we noticed that the lights are on tonight. A couple of restaurants and taverns are open. The ones we visited, people were all telling earthquake stories. As you can imagine, they seem to be in pretty good spirits. They might be getting over the shock of the quake, perhaps by talking. That might be catharsis. But in Santa Cruz, Watsonville, and Hollister, people are still reported to be camping out on their front lawns tonight. They're afraid to go back into their homes. Reporting live at Santa Cruz, I'm Mark Brown. Now back to Paul and Ann.
All right, Mark, thank you. A yeoman's duty there, too. We talked to the folks at Caltech earlier tonight about aftershocks. And so far today, there have been at least 13 aftershocks to yesterday's quake, measuring 3.5 on the Richter scale or higher. In the past few hours tonight, there's been a 4.1 and a 3.7. And seismologists at Caltech, the people we talked to, tell us the aftershocks are decreasing in strength and in frequency as time goes on. In the next 24 hours, there is thought to be only a 13% chance of a magnitude 5 aftershock. Ann?
Paul, the deadly collapse of the Nimitz Freeway in Oakland has renewed the fight against expanding the Harbor Freeway here in Los Angeles. And Mark Coogan reports that tragedy now raising new questions about the second level along that busy freeway.
The Harbor Freeway this evening, busier than usual because of the Rolling Stones at the Coliseum. But there's enough traffic on the harbor ordinarily for Caltrans to have begun this, a project to build a transitway on an elevated structure, an upper deck for buses and carpools for 3 miles through South Los Angeles.
And we're going to fight.
Tonight, Southside residents angry about having their property taken for an expanded harbor freeway had a new issue for opposing the project.
They were told that the Nimitz Freeway was earthquake safe. Now they're saying that perhaps the soil was soft. What we're saying is basically they don't know enough about construction of double decking to be able to ensure the safety.
This neighborhood dispute about an unpopular freeway project became visible because of a disaster 400 miles away. But fears about the safety of double-deck construction are not confined to South Los Angeles. Earlier today, LA City Councilwoman Joy Pike has called on Caltrans to abandon any idea of double-decking the Ventura Freeway in the San Fernando Valley. For its part, Caltrans said the freeway that failed in Oakland was designed in the 1950s.
I have a great deal of faith in our engineering design and what we've learned through earthquakes, and you know, it's just like buildings. The newer buildings are much safer than the old buildings.
But tonight, Assemblywoman Waters asked for a moment of silence for Bay Area quake victims, then promised she will push Governor Deukmejian to stop the harbor double-decking until he is assured it's safe. Mark Coogan, Channel 7 Eyewitness News, reporting.
It was just hours after the earthquake yesterday that Red Cross in San Jose was reporting a critical shortage of type O blood. Now the need is growing for blood throughout the Bay Area, and now they say they need just about every blood type, not just O, all of them. In Los Angeles, hundreds of people have responded to that call already, and as usual, the Red Cross is coordinating the blood donation effort. But the need is still great, and they need your help too if you would like to donate blood or money. And they need money just as much as they need the blood. You are asked to call your local chapter of the American Red Cross.